Marcus Thompson felt the transport helicopter shudder violently as another round of enemy fire peppered the aircraft's hull. The mission had gone sideways fast. What started as a routine extraction of a high-value target from a terrorist compound in the Syrian desert had turned into a nightmare when intelligence reports proved catastrophically wrong. Instead of a small cell, they'd walked into a heavily fortified stronghold with over 200 armed militants. The Delta Force team had completed their primary objective, securing the target, but the exfiltration had become a deadly game of cat and mouse. Marcus watched through the helicopter's window as the barren landscape rushed beneath them, endless miles of sand dunes and rocky outcroppings stretching to the horizon. The pilot's voice crackled through his headset, strain evident in every word. "We're losing fuel fast, Sergeant. That last hit damaged our main tank. I can maybe get us another 15 minutes before we have to put her down." Marcus glanced at his team members. Rodriguez was applying pressure to a bullet wound in his shoulder, while Johnson checked their remaining ammunition. Their extracted target, a captured ISIS commander named Khalil, sat zip-tied and blindfolded in the corner, completely unaware of their deteriorating situation. The helicopter lurched suddenly, and warning lights began flashing across the cockpit's instrument panel. Black smoke started seeping into the cabin, carrying the acrid smell of burning hydraulic fluid. The pilot fought with the controls as the aircraft began losing altitude rapidly. "Brace for impact," the pilot shouted. "We're going down." Marcus quickly secured himself and grabbed onto Rodriguez, who was struggling with his injury. The helicopter spun as it descended, the rotor blades fighting against the desert wind. Through the chaos, Marcus caught glimpses of the ground rushing up to meet them. Sand and rocks filled his vision as the aircraft hit the desert floor with tremendous force. The impact threw Marcus against the cabin wall, and everything went dark for several seconds. When consciousness returned, he found himself hanging upside down, still strapped into his harness. The helicopter had rolled onto its side, and smoke was now pouring from the engine compartment. His head throbbed, and he could taste blood in his mouth, but years of training kicked in immediately. "Sound off," Marcus called out, fighting to free himself from his restraints. "Rodriguez here," came a weak reply. "Shoulders messed up bad, but I'm breathing." "Johnson's unconscious but alive," Rodriguez added after checking their teammate. Marcus looked toward the cockpit and felt his heart sink. The pilot and co-pilot weren't moving, and the front of the aircraft was completely crushed. They were on their own in the middle of nowhere, with an injured teammate and limited supplies. Working quickly, Marcus freed himself and helped Rodriguez out of his harness. The smoke was getting thicker, and he could hear the ominous sound of fuel dripping onto hot metal. They needed to get everyone out before the helicopter caught fire or exploded. "Help me with Johnson," Marcus ordered, and together they carefully extracted their unconscious teammate from the wreckage. Rodriguez winced with every movement, his injured shoulder making the task even more difficult. Marcus then turned his attention to their prisoner. Khalil was conscious but dazed, speaking rapidly in Arabic. Despite everything that had happened, Marcus knew they couldn't leave him to die in a potential explosion. Mission protocols were clear about the treatment of prisoners, regardless of circumstances. They dragged everyone a safe distance from the helicopter just as small flames began licking at the fuel pooling beneath the aircraft. Marcus quickly assessed their situation, while keeping an eye on the growing fire. Johnson was starting to come around, groaning and holding his head. Rodriguez was losing blood steadily from his shoulder wound, and their prisoner was becoming increasingly agitated as he realized their predicament. Marcus checked his equipment. His rifle was intact, and he had 4 magazines of ammunition remaining. His survival kit contained basic medical supplies, water purification tablets, a compass, and emergency rations for 3 days. Rodriguez and Johnson's gear had been damaged in the crash, leaving them with minimal supplies. The helicopter finally erupted into flames, sending a black column of smoke high into the clear desert sky. Marcus knew that smoke could be seen for miles, which was both good and bad news. It might help rescue teams locate them, but it would also attract any hostile forces in the area. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, Marcus realized they were facing a survival situation that would test every skill he'd learned in his 15 years of military service. The temperature was already dropping, and desert nights could be brutally cold. They had no shelter, limited water, and 1 seriously injured team member. Johnson finally sat up, blinking in confusion. "What happened? Where are we?" We crashed about 20 miles from the extraction point, Marcus explained. Radio's dead and we're on foot from here. Marcus studied his map and compass, trying to determine their exact location. The crash had thrown them off course, and the familiar landmarks he'd memorized during mission planning were nowhere to be seen. The desert stretched endlessly in every direction, a sea of sand and rock that looked identical no matter which way he turned. Rodriguez was growing weaker by the minute, and Marcus knew they needed to find shelter and medical attention soon. But in this vast wilderness, rescue seemed unlikely. The extraction team would eventually realize they were missing, but it could be hours or even days before search operations began. As darkness approached, Marcus made the difficult decision to secure their prisoner to a piece of debris from the helicopter. Despite their circumstances, Khalil was still a high-value intelligence asset, and abandoning him wasn't an option. The man's capture had cost too much already. Marcus gathered his team and their meager supplies, looking out at the hostile environment surrounding them. He'd survived in jungles, mountains, and urban warfare zones, but the desert presented unique challenges. Water would be their biggest concern, followed by shelter from the extreme temperature variations. "Listen up," Marcus told his team, as stars began appearing in the darkening sky. "We're in for a long night, but we're going to make it through this. We stick together, conserve our strength, and move at first light." But even as he spoke these confident words, Marcus wondered if his training and experience would be enough to keep them all alive in one of the world's most unforgiving environments. The desert was about to test everything he thought he knew about survival. The desert night proved even more brutal than Marcus had anticipated. Temperatures dropped from the day's scorching heat to near freezing levels, and the team huddled together using pieces of the helicopter's interior as makeshift shelter. Rodriguez's condition had worsened, his breathing becoming shallow and his skin taking on an unhealthy pale color despite the darkness. Marcus kept watch through the night, scanning the horizon for any signs of movement while his teammates tried to rest. The stars above provided enough light to see their immediate surroundings, but beyond a few hundred meters, everything disappeared into black void. Every sound made him tense, from the settling of cooling metal debris to the distant call of a desert fox. Johnson had recovered somewhat from his concussion, though he still complained of severe headaches and occasional dizziness. Their prisoner, Khalil, had fallen into an exhausted sleep despite being restrained. Marcus studied the man's face in the starlight, wondering what information he possessed that had made his capture so critical to the mission. As dawn approached, Marcus began planning their next move. The burning helicopter had long since died down to smoldering embers, but the smoke column was gone, eliminating their primary signal for rescue teams. His GPS unit had been damaged in the crash, leaving him to navigate by compass and his knowledge of the region's general geography. When the first rays of sunlight crested the eastern horizon, Marcus gently woke his team. The temperature would start climbing rapidly once the sun was up, and they needed to cover as much ground as possible before the heat became unbearable. "How's everyone feeling?" Marcus asked, though he could see the answer in their faces. Johnson looked better than the previous night, but Rodriguez was clearly struggling. Dark circles rimmed his eyes, and his injured shoulder had swollen significantly, despite Marcus's attempts at field treatment. "I can walk," Rodriguez insisted, though his voice lacked conviction. "Just need to take it slow." Marcus knew they were facing impossible choices. Staying near the crash site increased their chances of being found by rescue teams, but it also made them sitting ducks for any hostile forces that might investigate the smoke column they'd created. Moving toward friendly territory meant traveling across dozens of miles of desert with limited supplies and an injured teammate. After careful consideration of their options, Marcus decided they had to move. The crash site was too exposed, and Rodriguez needed medical attention that wouldn't come to them in the middle of nowhere. He calculated their position as best he could and determined that a small outpost mentioned in their mission briefings lay roughly 30 miles to the northeast. "We're moving out," Marcus announced. "Rodriguez, you're with me. Johnson, you take point with the compass. Keep us heading northeast and stop every hour for water breaks." They salvaged what they could from the helicopter wreckage. Marcus found an emergency medical kit that had been thrown clear during the crash, along with a damaged radio that might be repairable with time and proper tools. Johnson located a survival blanket and some emergency flares that could prove invaluable for signaling. The biggest challenge was water. They had perhaps 2 liters between them, which wouldn't last more than a day in the desert heat. Marcus knew they needed to find water sources along their route, or face dehydration within hours. As they prepared to leave, Khalil began speaking in rapid Arabic, gesturing toward the horizon. Marcus understood enough of the language to catch references to water and villages, but he couldn't tell if the man was trying to help or mislead them. "What's he saying?" Johnson asked. Marcus studied their prisoner's face, looking for signs of deception. "Claims there's a village with water about 15 miles north of here. Could be true, could be leading us into a trap." The decision weighed heavily on Marcus. Following Khalil's directions might save Rodriguez's life, but it could also lead them straight into enemy hands. After several tense minutes of consideration, Marcus decided the risk was worth taking. Rodriguez was deteriorating rapidly, and they needed water regardless of the source. They began their trek across the desert as the sun climbed higher in the sky. The sand made walking difficult, especially for Rodriguez, who was clearly struggling to keep pace. Every step seemed to drain more of his remaining strength, and Marcus found himself constantly checking on his teammates' condition. The landscape was harshly beautiful in the morning light. Rolling dunes stretched in every direction, broken occasionally by rocky outcroppings and sparse vegetation. Marcus had trained in desert environments before, but experiencing it as a survival situation rather than an exercise made every detail more vivid and threatening. After 2 hours of walking, they stopped for their first water break. Marcus carefully rationed their supply, giving each person just enough to wet their mouths without wasting precious fluid. Rodriguez's hands shook as he drank, and Marcus noticed the man's lips were already beginning to crack from dehydration. "Talk to me, Rodriguez," Marcus said quietly. "How are you holding up?" "Been better," Rodriguez admitted. "Shoulders on fire, and I'm seeing spots when I stand up too fast. But I can keep going." Marcus admired his teammates' determination, but he could see the reality of their situation in Rodriguez's pale complexion and labored breathing. They needed to find help soon, or he was going to lose a good soldier to blood loss and exposure. As they resumed walking, Marcus noticed tracks in the sand. Vehicle treads, relatively fresh, heading in the same direction they were traveling. His first instinct was wariness, but the tracks also represented hope. Vehicles meant people, and people might mean water, shelter, and medical supplies. Johnson spotted it first, a glint of metal on the horizon that gradually resolved into a small settlement as they drew closer. Simple concrete buildings surrounded by a low wall, with a few vehicles parked outside. Smoke rose from a chimney, indicating the place was occupied. Marcus called a halt and studied the village through his rifle scope. He could see people moving around, but couldn't determine if they were friendly civilians or hostile combatants. The vehicles looked like civilian trucks, but that didn't guarantee anything in this region. "What do you think?" Johnson asked, following Marcus's gaze toward the settlement. Marcus weighed their options once again. Rodriguez was barely staying on his feet. Their water was nearly gone, and the sun was climbing toward its peak intensity. They could try to circle around the village and continue toward the military outpost, but that would mean at least another day of travel with no guarantee of success. "We need water and medical supplies," Marcus decided, "but we go in careful and ready for anything." As they approached the village, Marcus kept his weapon ready while maintaining a non-threatening posture. Years of experience in hostile territory had taught him to project strength while leaving room for peaceful resolution. Behind him, Rodriguez struggled to keep up, and their prisoner shuffled along in sullen silence. The village grew larger with each step, and Marcus could make out more details. Children played in a courtyard while women worked at outdoor cooking stations. It looked peaceful enough, but appearances could be deceiving in a war zone. A man emerged from the largest building, watching their approach with obvious concern. Marcus raised one hand in greeting while keeping the other near his weapon, hoping they were about to find help rather than more trouble in the endless desert. The man who approached them was elderly, with weathered hands and kind eyes that had seen decades of desert life. He spoke in broken English, mixed with Arabic phrases that Marcus could partially understand. Behind him, other villagers gathered at a respectful distance, their faces showing curiosity rather than hostility. "American soldiers?" the old man asked, his voice carrying concern rather than fear. "You are hurt?" Marcus kept his weapon lowered but ready as he assessed the situation. The village appeared to be exactly what it seemed, a small community of families trying to survive in the harsh desert environment. Children peeked out from behind their mothers' robes, and he could see no signs of weapons or military equipment. "We had aircraft trouble," Marcus explained carefully. "My friend is injured and needs medical attention. Can you help us?" The old man, who introduced himself as Ahmed, immediately nodded toward Rodriguez. Years of living in a conflict zone had taught these people to recognize serious injuries, and Ahmed's experienced eye quickly assessed the wounded soldier's condition. "Bring him," Ahmed said, gesturing toward the largest building. "My daughter, she knows medicine, learned from doctors in the city before the fighting came." Marcus hesitated, weighing the risks. Entering the building would put them in a vulnerable position, but Rodriguez was barely conscious and desperately needed help. Johnson caught his eye and nodded slightly, indicating his agreement with taking the chance. They followed Ahmed into the building, which turned out to be the village's community center and informal medical clinic. A young woman in traditional dress emerged from a back room, carrying a bag that Marcus recognized as medical supplies. Her movements were confident and professional as she examined Rodriguez's shoulder wound. "The bullet went through," she said in surprisingly clear English. "That is good. But he has lost much blood and needs antibiotics to prevent infection." As the woman worked on Rodriguez, cleaning and bandaging his wound with practiced efficiency, Marcus found himself relaxing slightly for the first time since the helicopter crash. The villagers brought water and simple food, refusing to accept any payment despite their obvious poverty. Ahmed explained that their village had remained neutral throughout the various conflicts that had swept through the region. They helped anyone who needed assistance regardless of their politics or nationality. This policy had kept them safe when other communities had been destroyed or abandoned. "We know the desert," Ahmed said, settling beside Marcus on woven mats. "It kills quickly those who do not respect it. Better to help travelers than to make enemies." Their prisoner Khalil had remained silent since entering the village, but Marcus noticed the man watching everything with sharp intelligence. When Ahmed offered him water, Khalil spoke rapidly in Arabic, and Marcus caught enough words to understand he was asking for sanctuary. Ahmed's expression grew troubled as he listened to Khalil's requests. The old man looked at Marcus questioningly, clearly caught between his desire to help and his understanding that this situation was more complicated than a simple rescue. "He says he wants to stay here," Ahmed translated, "claims he is being taken against his will by American soldiers." Marcus found himself in a difficult position. Mission protocols were clear about maintaining custody of high-value prisoners, but he was also acutely aware that he had no authority to compel these civilians to help him. Their hospitality was voluntary, and pushing too hard could turn allies into enemies. "This man is dangerous," Marcus explained carefully. "He has information about people who hurt innocent civilians. We need to take him to authorities who can protect people from his friends." Ahmed nodded slowly, understanding the complexity of the situation. After several minutes of quiet discussion with other village elders who had gathered, he returned to Marcus with their decision. "We will help you reach safe place," Ahmed said. "But we cannot hold this man if he wishes to leave. We are not soldiers or police." It was a fair compromise, and Marcus accepted it gratefully. The villagers' honesty and wisdom impressed him, and he understood why they had survived so long in such a dangerous region. They helped everyone but avoided taking sides in conflicts that weren't their own. Rodriguez was looking much better after receiving proper medical attention. The village healer had given him antibiotics and pain medication, and his color was already starting to return. Johnson had been examining their damaged radio with one of the villagers who had electronic repair skills. "Think we can get this working?" Marcus asked, looking over Johnson's shoulder at the disassembled radio components. "Maybe," Johnson replied. "Ahmed's nephew worked as a radio technician before the war. He thinks the main transmitter is intact, but we need to bypass some damaged circuits." As evening approached, Marcus gathered with the village elders to discuss their next moves. Ahmed spread out a hand-drawn map showing local geography, marked with water sources, safe routes, and areas to avoid due to various dangers. "The military base you seek is here." Ahmed pointed to a spot on the map, perhaps 25 kilometers through the rocky country. Difficult walking, but safer than the main roads where fighters sometimes travel. The route would take them through more challenging terrain, but it avoided areas where they might encounter hostile forces. Ahmed also provided information about 2 water sources along the way, small springs hidden among rock formations that would be invisible to anyone unfamiliar with the area. "You leave at dawn?" Ahmed asked. "The walking is easier in cool morning air." Marcus nodded, grateful for the man's practical wisdom. They would spend the night in the village, giving Rodriguez more time to recover and allowing Johnson to work on the radio repairs. The delay also gave Marcus time to plan their final push to safety. As stars appeared in the clear desert sky, Marcus sat with Ahmed outside the community center, sharing tea and watching the peaceful evening activities of village life. Children played games while adults talked quietly around small fires, and the scene reminded Marcus of why he had chosen a career protecting innocent people. "You are soldier long time?" Ahmed asked, studying Marcus's weathered hands and alert posture. 15 years, Marcus replied. "Seen a lot of places, met a lot of good people like your family here." Ahmed smiled and refilled Marcus's tea glass. "Desert teaches patience," he said. "Also teaches that helping others brings good fortune. Tomorrow you reach your people safely, I think." Marcus hoped the old man was right. They had come so far and overcome so many obstacles that it seemed almost too good to be true, that safety might be within reach. But as he looked at Rodriguez, who was sleeping peacefully for the first time since the crash, Marcus allowed himself to feel cautiously optimistic about their chances. The radio crackled to life briefly as Johnson tested the repairs, and Marcus heard the faint sound of military communications in the distance. Their rescue might be closer than he had dared hope, but he knew better than to count on anything until they were actually safe. As the village settled into quiet for the night, Marcus took first watch, grateful for the kindness of strangers and hoping tomorrow would bring them home. Dawn brought unwelcome news that changed everything. Johnson had successfully repaired the radio during the night and managed to establish brief contact with military communications. What he learned made Marcus's blood run cold with concern for their hosts. "Command says a large hostile force is moving through this area," Johnson reported quietly, keeping his voice low to avoid alarming the villagers. "They're looking for us and our prisoner. Intelligence estimates at least 50 fighters with vehicles, and they're checking every settlement." Marcus felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders like a physical burden. Their presence had inadvertently put these peaceful people in terrible danger. If hostile forces discovered that the village had helped American soldiers, the consequences would be swift and brutal. Ahmed noticed the concern on Marcus's face and approached with his usual gentle manner. "There is trouble coming?" he asked simply. Marcus decided honesty was the best approach. These people deserved to know what they were facing because of their kindness to strangers. He explained the situation carefully, watching Ahmed's expression grow grave as he understood the implications. "You must leave quickly," Ahmed said after conferring with other village elders. "We will say we saw nothing if fighters come asking questions." But Marcus knew that wouldn't be enough. The enemy forces would likely search the village thoroughly, and evidence of their presence would be difficult to hide completely. Medical supplies used on Rodriguez, footprints around the buildings, and testimony from anyone who might have seen them could all lead to deadly consequences for the villagers. "There might be another way," Marcus said, his mind working through tactical possibilities. "But it would be dangerous for everyone." Marcus outlined a plan that would draw the hostile forces away from the village while giving his team a better chance of reaching safety. It was risky and would require careful timing, but it offered the best hope of protecting their hosts while completing their mission. The plan centered on using their prisoner as bait. Marcus would take Khalil and create an obvious trail leading away from the village toward the rocky terrain, where they could establish a defensive position. Meanwhile, Johnson would stay behind with Rodriguez, who wasn't strong enough for rapid movement, hidden in a cave system that Ahmed knew about several miles from the village. "The fighters will follow my trail," Marcus explained. "When they catch up, I'll have the high ground and can hold them off long enough for you to reach the military outpost with our intel." Ahmed listened to the plan with growing concern. One man against many fighters? This is not good odds, even for an American soldier. Marcus appreciated the old man's worry, but he had made his decision. His training and experience gave him the best chance of survival in a running battle through difficult terrain, and it was his responsibility to protect both his team and the innocent civilians who had helped them. The village healer, Ahmed's daughter, prepared additional medical supplies for Rodriguez and gave Marcus a small bag of pain medication in case his wounds reopened during the coming ordeal. She also provided detailed directions to hidden water sources in the rocky country where Marcus would be operating. As they prepared to leave, Khalil seemed to understand what was happening. He spoke urgently to Ahmed in Arabic, and Marcus could tell the conversation was intense from both men's expressions. "What's he saying?" Marcus asked. Ahmed looked troubled as he translated. "He warns that the fighters tracking you are very dangerous men. Not regular soldiers, but specialists who enjoy killing. He says you should release him to them and save yourself." Marcus found himself grudgingly respecting the prisoner's apparent concern for his safety, even though he knew it might be a manipulation tactic. Khalil had remained relatively cooperative throughout their ordeal, and his warning seemed genuine. "Tell him I appreciate the concern," Marcus replied, "but I have a job to finish." The team gathered their equipment and prepared to split up. Rodriguez was moving better after a night of rest and proper medical care, but he was still weak and would need Johnson's support to reach safety. The two men would follow Ahmed's suggested route through the desert, moving slowly but staying hidden. Marcus would take the more direct path through the rocky terrain, making himself visible to draw pursuit while establishing defensible positions along the way. His Delta Force training had prepared him for exactly this type of situation, operating alone behind enemy lines with limited resources. Ahmed provided Marcus with additional water and emergency food, refusing to accept payment despite his family's obvious poverty. The old man also shared detailed knowledge of the terrain Marcus would be crossing, pointing out caves, hidden paths, and potential ambush sites on the hand-drawn map. "Remember," Ahmed said seriously, "the desert is neutral. It helps those who understand it and kills those who fight it. Use this knowledge against your enemies." As the sun climbed higher, Marcus knew they couldn't delay any longer. The hostile forces were getting closer, and every minute increased the danger to the village. He made final checks of his equipment, ensuring his rifle was clean and his remaining ammunition was properly distributed. Johnson clasped Marcus's shoulder firmly. "See you at the outpost, Sergeant. Don't do anything stupid out there." "Stupid is my middle name," Marcus replied with a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Just get Rodriguez home safe." Marcus set out with Khalil across the desert toward the rocky hills, deliberately leaving clear tracks that would be easy for pursuers to follow. Behind him, Johnson helped Rodriguez toward their own route, moving carefully to avoid leaving obvious signs of their passage. The separation felt strange after everything they had been through together, but Marcus knew it was their best chance for everyone to survive. His solitary mission would be the most dangerous part of their entire ordeal, but it also played to his strengths as a special operations soldier. As they walked, Khalil surprised Marcus by speaking in careful English. "You are a good soldier," he said quietly, "but these men who follow us, they are not like regular fighters. They know desert very well, and they do not give up easily." Marcus studied his prisoner's face, looking for signs of deception or hidden agendas. "Why tell me this? Why help me at all?" Khalil was quiet for several minutes before answering. Village people showed kindness when they did not have to. Children should not suffer for helping wounded soldier. It was an answer Marcus could respect even from an enemy. The complexity of their situation struck him once again as they approached the rocky terrain where the final phase of their survival would play out. In a few hours he would face his greatest challenge yet, alone except for a prisoner who might be an ally or might be planning to betray him at the first opportunity. The rocks ahead looked forbidding in the morning heat, but they also offered cover and defensive positions that could turn the tables on pursuing forces. Marcus began planning his strategy as they climbed into the hills, knowing that everything would depend on his ability to outthink and outfight enemies who knew the terrain as well as he did. The rocky terrain proved even more challenging than Marcus had anticipated. Jagged limestone formations created a maze of passages and dead ends, while loose scree made every step treacherous. The morning sun was already heating the rocks to temperatures that would become unbearable by midday, and Marcus knew he had to establish his defensive position quickly. He found what he was looking for after 2 hours of climbing: a narrow canyon with high walls that funneled into a circular clearing, surrounded by caves and overhangs. The position offered multiple escape routes while forcing any attackers to approach through predictable choke points. More importantly, a small spring trickled down one rock face, providing the water he would need for an extended defense. Marcus secured Khalil in one of the caves, using zip ties to anchor him to a solid rock formation. The prisoner had remained cooperative during their climb, even pointing out loose rocks and dangerous footing that could have caused serious injuries. His behavior continued to puzzle Marcus, who had expected more resistance or escape attempts. "Why haven't you tried to run?" Marcus asked directly as he checked the restraints. "You've had several opportunities." Khalil looked out at the desert below them before answering. "Where would I go? My own people will kill me if they think I talk to Americans. Your people will hunt me if I escape. Better to stay alive and see what happens." It was a pragmatic answer that made sense given their circumstances. Marcus found himself developing a grudging respect for the man's intelligence and survival instincts, even though he remained cautious about trusting him completely. The sound of vehicle engines in the distance announced the arrival of their pursuers sooner than Marcus had hoped. He counted at least 4 trucks based on the engine noise, which meant 15 to 20 fighters at minimum. The odds were daunting, but the terrain gave him significant advantages if he played it correctly. Through his rifle scope, Marcus watched the hostile force spread out at the base of the rocky hills. They moved with military precision, establishing a perimeter before beginning their ascent. These weren't untrained militia fighters, but experienced soldiers who knew their business. Khalil's warnings had been accurate. Marcus had positioned himself on a high ledge that overlooked the main approach to his canyon fortress. The range was perfect for precision shooting, and he had clear fields of fire down 3 different routes the attackers might use. His remaining ammunition would have to count, as resupply was impossible. The first fighter appeared in his scope at exactly 150 meters, moving carefully from cover to cover but still exposed enough for a clean shot. Marcus controlled his breathing and squeezed the trigger smoothly, watching the man drop immediately. The sound of the shot echoed off the canyon walls, alerting the entire force to his position. Chaos erupted as the attackers scattered for cover while trying to locate the source of the gunfire. Marcus had already shifted to a secondary position, using the maze-like terrain to stay ahead of their attempts to flank him. 2 more shots dropped fighters who exposed themselves while trying to advance, and the assault stalled as the survivors reassessed their approach. The enemy commander was clearly experienced, as Marcus could hear shouted orders organizing a more systematic attack. They would try to pin him down with suppressing fire, while teams moved through the rocks to assault his position from multiple directions. It was exactly what Marcus would have done in their situation. For the next hour, a deadly game of cat and mouse played out among the rock formations. Marcus used his superior knowledge of the terrain to stay one step ahead of the pursuing forces, picking off isolated fighters while avoiding their attempts to surround him. His ammunition was running dangerously low, but he had eliminated at least 6 enemies and wounded several others. The attackers adapted their tactics, using smoke grenades to obscure their movements and concentrated fire to keep Marcus pinned in place for longer periods. They were learning the terrain quickly and beginning to predict his likely positions. The noose was tightening, and Marcus knew he needed to change the dynamic of the engagement. That's when Khalil surprised him again. "There is another way out," the prisoner called from his cave as bullets sparked off nearby rocks. "Hidden path down the backside of this hill. They do not know about it." Marcus looked at him suspiciously. "Why help me? Your friends are the ones shooting at us." "These are not my friends," Khalil replied firmly. "They follow different leader now, one who kills prisoners instead of trading them. If they catch me, I am dead man whether you are here or not." The explanation rang true, and Marcus realized that Khalil's survival depended on keeping American forces between him and his former allies. The prisoner's cooperation wasn't loyalty but pure self-preservation, which made it more trustworthy than ideological conversion. Another wave of attackers was moving up the canyon toward their position, and Marcus could hear others climbing the rock faces on both sides. In minutes, he would be surrounded with no chance of escape through conventional routes. Khalil's hidden path might be their only hope. "Show me," Marcus decided, cutting the prisoner's restraints but keeping his weapon ready. "But remember, if this is a trap, you'll be the first one to die." Khalil led him deeper into the cave system through passages so narrow they had to crawl in some places. The route was obviously ancient, carved by water over thousands of years and widened by human hands in more recent times. It was also completely invisible from outside, which explained how it had remained secret. They emerged onto a ledge on the opposite side of the hill, with a steep but manageable descent to the desert floor. Marcus could see the attackers' vehicles in the distance, left unguarded while their crews pursued him through the rocks. The sight gave him an idea that could turn the tables completely. "Can you drive?" Marcus asked Khalil. The prisoner nodded. "Of course. You want to steal their trucks?" "Not steal," Marcus corrected. "Disable. If we can knock out their transportation, they'll be stuck out here just like we were." They made their way down the hidden path, moving carefully to avoid attracting attention from the fighters still searching the canyon above. The sound of gunfire echoed off the rocks as the attackers shot at shadows, unaware that their quarry had escaped their trap. The vehicles were parked in a loose circle about half a mile from the base of the hills. Marcus counted 3 pickup trucks and 1 larger transport vehicle, all equipped with heavy machine guns and loaded with supplies. 2 guards had been left behind, but they were focused on the action in the rocks rather than watching for threats from behind. Marcus studied the situation through his scope, planning his approach. The guards were alert but not expecting trouble from their rear. If he could eliminate them quietly, he and Khalil could sabotage the vehicles without alerting the main force. It would strand the attackers in the desert without transportation or supplies, effectively ending their pursuit. "Stay here and watch for my signal," Marcus instructed Khalil. "When I wave, circle around to the far side and disable the engines on those 2 trucks. Pull the distributor caps and cut any wires you can reach." Marcus moved into position, using the scattered rocks and sparse vegetation for concealment. The guards were becoming increasingly nervous as the gunfire from the hills intensified, clearly wondering if they should abandon their posts to join the fight. One man kept checking his radio, trying to get updates from his commander. The approach took Marcus 20 minutes of careful movement, but he managed to get within striking distance of both guards without being detected. Years of training in close quarters combat served him well, as he eliminated both sentries silently and efficiently. He signaled Khalil, who immediately began working on the vehicle engines with surprising skill. Marcus focused on the larger transport truck, which contained most of the attackers' water and ammunition supplies. He placed small explosive charges from his demolition kit at critical points on the vehicle, setting timers that would give them enough time to escape before the destruction began. The explosions would also serve as a distraction, drawing the scattered fighters back toward their vehicles. "Finished," Khalil reported, wiping grease from his hands. "These trucks will not start again without major repairs." Marcus completed his sabotage work and checked his watch. They had perhaps 10 minutes before the explosives detonated, and they needed to be well clear of the area when that happened. The sound would carry for miles and would definitely attract attention from any other hostile forces in the region. They began moving away from the vehicles toward a low ridge that would provide cover from the coming explosions. Behind them, the gunfire in the rocks was becoming more sporadic as the attackers realized their target had escaped. Soon they would return to their vehicles and discover the unpleasant surprise waiting for them. "Where do we go now?" Khalil asked as they reached the safety of the ridge. Marcus consulted his map and compass, calculating their position relative to the military outpost that remained their ultimate destination. The sabotage operation had taken them several miles off their planned route, but it had also eliminated the immediate threat of vehicular pursuit. "Northeast," Marcus replied. "About 15 miles to friendly territory. We'll move during the cooler parts of the day and rest during peak heat." The evening march across the open desert proved more challenging than Marcus had anticipated. Without the rocky terrain to provide concealment, they were exposed to observation from any elevated positions in the surrounding landscape. Marcus constantly scanned the horizon through his rifle scope, looking for signs of movement or the glint of metal that might indicate hostile forces. Their water situation had become critical again. The physical exertion of the day's combat and the stress of their escape had increased their fluid requirements significantly. Marcus calculated that they had perhaps 8 hours of supply remaining, which should be enough to reach the outpost but left no margin for error or delays. Khalil had proven to be an excellent traveling companion, maintaining the pace without complaint and demonstrating impressive knowledge of desert navigation techniques. He pointed out subtle landmarks that helped Marcus confirm their position and suggested route modifications that avoided areas of soft sand where walking would be more difficult. "You have done this before," Marcus observed as they stopped for a brief rest. "Traveled long distances in the desert, I mean." Khalil nodded, his expression growing distant. "My family were nomads before the wars changed everything. We moved with the seasons, following water and grazing lands. I learned desert skills as a child before I became a soldier." The personal revelation surprised Marcus. Throughout their ordeal, he had thought of Khalil primarily as a prisoner and intelligence asset, rather than as a person with his own history and motivations. The reminder of their shared humanity was both uncomfortable and oddly reassuring. As full darkness fell, they encountered their first sign of friendly forces. A distant aircraft passed overhead, too high to identify but following a flight pattern that suggested military rather than civilian operation. Marcus attempted to signal with his emergency strobe light, but the aircraft continued without acknowledging their presence. The radio finally crackled to life with clear transmissions as they climbed a low hill that provided better line of sight to the military outpost. Marcus could hear search and rescue operations being coordinated, with multiple teams searching different sectors for signs of the missing helicopter crew. "This is Delta 77, Marcus transmitted on the emergency frequency. "Two souls alive and mobile, requesting immediate extraction at grid coordinates." He provided their position and status, keeping the transmission brief to avoid detection by hostile forces that might be monitoring communications. The response came immediately. "Delta 77, this is Rescue Control. Confirm your identity with authentication code." Marcus provided the required codes and repeated their situation. The relief in the controller's voice was evident as he acknowledged their survival and began coordinating recovery operations. Within minutes, Marcus had confirmation that Rodriguez and Johnson had also reached safety, having been picked up by a patrol 6 hours earlier. "Extraction team inbound your position," the controller reported. "ETA 45 minutes. Mark your location with strobe and maintain radio contact." Marcus felt a surge of relief that was almost overwhelming. After everything they had been through, rescue was finally at hand. But he also knew that 45 minutes was a long time in hostile territory, and they couldn't afford to relax their vigilance until they were actually safe. They established a defensive position on the hilltop, using scattered rocks to create cover while maintaining visibility in all directions. Marcus set up his strobe light and tested the radio communications to ensure the extraction team could locate them easily. Everything seemed to be falling into place perfectly. That's when they heard the vehicle engines in the distance. Marcus immediately shut off the strobe and grabbed his rifle, scanning the darkness for sources of the engine noise. Through his night vision scope, he could see headlights moving across the desert from the direction they had come. At least 2 vehicles moving fast toward their position. "Survivors from the group we hit earlier?" Khalil asked quietly. Marcus nodded grimly. Some of the attackers had obviously found alternative transportation and were continuing their pursuit. The timing was terrible, with rescue so close but still over half an hour away. They would have to hold their position against unknown numbers of enemies while hoping the extraction team could reach them in time. The vehicle stopped about half a mile away, and Marcus could see armed figures dismounting and beginning to advance on foot. They had learned from their earlier mistakes and were approaching more cautiously, using available cover and coordinating their movements. The attack would be more professional and dangerous than their previous encounters. Marcus counted at least 8 fighters moving toward their position, armed with assault rifles and what appeared to be a light machine gun. They were spreading out to attack from multiple directions, making it impossible for him to cover all approaches simultaneously. His ammunition situation was also critical, with fewer than 30 rounds remaining. "Can you shoot?" Marcus asked Khalil, indicating one of the guard's weapons he had captured earlier. Khalil hesitated for a moment before nodding. "Yes, but if I fight your enemies, there is no going back for me. My own people will consider me a traitor." "Seems like they already do," Marcus pointed out. "You said yourself they'll kill you if they catch you." Khalil accepted the weapon and checked its condition with practiced efficiency. "Then we fight together and hope your rescue comes quickly." The first shots came from the machine gun position, raking their hilltop with automatic fire that forced them to stay low behind their rock cover. Marcus could hear bullets whining overhead and chipping stone fragments from their makeshift fortifications. The attackers were establishing fire superiority, while their assault teams moved closer. Marcus returned fire carefully, making every shot count while conserving his limited ammunition. He managed to hit one attacker who exposed himself too long while advancing, but the others continued their approach with disciplined tactical movement. These weren't the same fighters from earlier. This was a different group with better training and equipment. Khalil proved to be an excellent marksman, placing precise shots that forced the attackers to move more carefully and disrupted their assault plan. His knowledge of local tactics was also valuable, as he could predict their likely moves and warn Marcus of potential flanking attempts. "They will try to get behind us," Khalil warned during a brief lull in the firing. "That depression to the east gives them cover to circle around." Marcus shifted position to cover the eastern approach, while Khalil maintained watch on the main advance. The radio crackled with updates from the extraction team, still 20 minutes out and requesting their exact status. Marcus provided a brief situation report while bullets sparked off nearby rocks. The machine gun resumed firing, this time supported by rifle fire from at least 3 directions. The attackers had successfully surrounded their position and were closing in for the final assault. Marcus realized they were running out of time and options. That's when he heard the distinctive sound of helicopter rotors approaching from the north. The extraction team was arriving early, and Marcus could see navigation lights moving toward their position. He immediately activated his strobe and began guiding the aircraft to a landing zone about 200 meters from their defensive position. The problem was reaching the helicopter through the attacking forces that now surrounded them. "We have to move," Marcus told Khalil. "When I say go, we head straight for that helicopter and don't stop for anything." The helicopter touched down and immediately came under fire from the attacking forces. Marcus could see muzzle flashes erupting around the landing zone as the crew returned fire with mounted weapons. The pilot was keeping the engines running for a quick departure, but they needed to reach the aircraft before the hostile fire forced it to abort the extraction. "Go!" Marcus shouted, and they broke cover simultaneously, running toward the helicopter while laying down suppressing fire to keep the attackers' heads down. Bullets kicked up sand around their feet as they sprinted across the open ground, but the helicopter crew's return fire was forcing their enemies to take cover rather than aim carefully. They reached the aircraft as the crew chief was laying down covering fire with a mounted machine gun. Strong hands pulled them aboard as the pilot immediately lifted off, climbing rapidly while the door gunners continued engaging targets on the ground below. Marcus collapsed onto the helicopter's floor, exhausted but finally safe after their incredible ordeal. Beside him, Khalil sat quietly with his hands raised, making no threatening moves as armed soldiers secured him for transport. The prisoner had kept his word throughout their escape, and Marcus found himself hoping the man would receive fair treatment rather than summary execution. As the lights of the military outpost grew larger ahead of them, Marcus reflected on everything that had happened since their helicopter crashed in the desert. They had survived against impossible odds through a combination of training, determination, and unexpected help from both civilians and enemies who had chosen cooperation over conflict. The mission was finally complete, but Marcus knew the real victory wasn't the intelligence they had gathered or the successful extraction of their prisoner. It was the proof that even in the harshest environments and most desperate circumstances, human decency and cooperation could triumph over hatred and violence. The debriefing took place in a secure facility at the military outpost, where Marcus finally learned the full scope of what their mission had accomplished. Intelligence analysts had been working around the clock to process the information they had gathered, and the results exceeded everyone's expectations. Khalil had proven to be a treasure trove of actionable intelligence about terrorist networks operating throughout the region. More importantly, his cooperation during their escape had demonstrated a genuine desire to distance himself from extremist activities. The prisoner had been granted protected status and was working with interrogators to identify key targets and disrupted planned attacks. Rodriguez was recovering well from his injuries in the base medical facility. The village healer's treatment had prevented serious infection, and military doctors were impressed with the quality of care he had received from civilians with limited resources. Johnson had suffered no lasting effects from his concussion and was already requesting assignment to the next available mission. Marcus sat in the base commander's office, receiving commendations for his leadership during the crisis, while also discussing the unusual circumstances of their survival. Colonel Hayes, the base commander, was particularly interested in the assistance they had received from local civilians. Your report mentions significant help from a village that harbored your team, Colonel Hayes said, reviewing Marcus's written account. These people took considerable risks to aid American forces. Marcus nodded, thinking of Ahmed and his family who had shown such kindness to strangers. Without their help, sir, we wouldn't have made it. Rodriguez would have died from his injuries and we'd never have escaped the pursuing forces. The colonel made notes in Marcus's file before looking up seriously. I'm authorizing a humanitarian aid package for that village. Medical supplies, water purification equipment, and educational materials for their children. It's the least we can do to show our appreciation. The news filled Marcus with satisfaction. Throughout their ordeal, he had worried about the consequences his team's presence might have brought to innocent people. Knowing that their kindness would be rewarded rather than punished felt like the proper conclusion to their incredible journey. Later that day, Marcus visited Khalil in the detention facility where he was being held during the intelligence gathering process. The man looked different in clean clothes with proper medical attention. More like a teacher or businessman than the dangerous terrorist Marcus had initially believed him to be. I wanted to thank you, Marcus said simply. You could have escaped or betrayed us several times, but you chose to help instead. Khalil looked thoughtful before responding. In the desert, I remembered what my grandfather taught me as a child. He said that a man's true character is revealed not when he is strong, but when he is helpless. You and your soldiers showed honor even when you were desperate. They talked for several minutes about their shared experience and what would happen next. Khalil would likely be relocated to a safe location, where he could start a new life away from the conflicts that had consumed his homeland. His information had already prevented 3 planned attacks and led to the capture of several high-value targets. What will you do now? Khalil asked as their conversation drew to a close. Marcus considered the question carefully. His 15-year military career had been defined by dangerous missions and life-or-death decisions, but the desert experience had given him a new perspective on what truly mattered. I think it might be time to find a different way to serve, he replied. 3 months later, Marcus found himself back in the same desert region, but under very different circumstances. He had accepted a position with a humanitarian organization that provided aid to refugee communities and isolated villages throughout the conflict zones. His military experience and survival skills made him uniquely qualified for the dangerous work of delivering supplies to areas other aid workers couldn't reach. His first assignment brought him back to Ahmed's village, where the promised aid packages had transformed daily life for the better. Clean water flowed from new wells, a small clinic provided basic medical care, and children attended classes in a newly constructed school building. Ahmed greeted Marcus like a long-lost family member, insisting he stay for a traditional feast to celebrate his return. The entire village participated in the celebration, and Marcus found himself surrounded by the same warmth and hospitality that had saved his life during those desperate days in the desert. You look different, Ahmed observed as they shared tea after the evening meal. More peaceful, I think. Marcus smiled, thinking about how much his life had changed since their first meeting. The desert taught me some important lessons about what really matters. I decided to listen to them. During his visit, Marcus learned that the village had become a model for other communities in the region. Word of their successful cooperation with international aid organizations had spread, and several neighboring settlements had requested similar assistance. The cycle of kindness that had begun with Ahmed's decision to help wounded strangers was expanding to benefit hundreds of families. Rodriguez and Johnson had also made significant changes in their lives. Rodriguez had accepted a training position at the military academy, sharing his combat experience with the next generation of soldiers. Johnson had joined the military's Humanitarian Assistance Division, using his technical skills to install communications equipment in remote villages. As Marcus prepared to leave the village for his next assignment, Ahmed walked with him to the edge of the settlement where a new road connected the community to the wider world. The improvements had brought progress and opportunity, but the essential character of the place remained unchanged. Will we see you again? Ahmed asked. Probably, Marcus replied. There are a lot of villages out here that could use help, and someone needs to make sure they get it. They shook hands in the traditional manner, and Marcus set off across the desert toward his next destination. The sun was setting behind him, painting the sand dunes in brilliant colors that reminded him of that first terrible night when everything had seemed hopeless. Now the same landscape looked beautiful rather than threatening. He had learned to see the desert as Ahmed did, a neutral force that reflected the character of those who traveled through it. It could be a harsh enemy or a protective ally, depending on how it was approached and understood. As stars began appearing in the darkening sky, Marcus reflected on the extraordinary chain of events that had brought him to this moment. A failed mission had become a successful rescue, enemies had become allies, and a career soldier had discovered a new purpose that felt more meaningful than anything he had done before. The desert stretched endlessly in all directions, full of hidden villages and forgotten communities where people like Ahmed continued to show kindness to strangers, despite living in a world that often seemed determined to reward cruelty instead. Marcus had found his calling in connecting those islands of hope and humanity, ensuring that goodness would continue to flourish even in the harshest environments. Behind him, the lights of Ahmed's village glowed warmly in the gathering darkness, a beacon of possibility in a landscape that had once seemed impossibly hostile. Ahead lay new challenges and opportunities to make a difference in the lives of people who had been forgotten by the wider world but who possessed the same capacity for courage and compassion that had saved his life when he needed it most. The story that had begun with a helicopter crash in the middle of nowhere had become something far more significant, proof that even in the most desperate circumstances, human beings could choose cooperation over conflict, hope over despair, and love over fear. It was a lesson Marcus would carry with him as he continued his journey across the endless desert, searching for the next village that needed help, and the next opportunity to repay the debt of gratitude he owed to the strangers who had shown him the true meaning of survival.